So welcome to the Climate Action Project again. And as you know, we've been going for 12 months. We're a project hosted by Glamis Hall for All and the Wellingborough Eco Group. We're funded by Northants Council, and our aim is to help us all better understand the challenges around the climate emergency and see what we can do as individuals, communities and businesses to respond to that and create a better, more sustainable lives and work as well. The project's got a variety of stages. We've done the climate conversations and the carbon awareness work. We've done the energy saving part of these workshops. Now we're moving on to the sustainability part. And then after these, we'll be picking various topics to try and work on as people, you know, depending on the various interests that we have. We're also looking to create a community forum where we can bring people together and maybe create plans to actually help us to transition to more sustainable ways of living and working. So sustainability workshops, as you know, we've got 11 of these. We've done 4 already. This is the 5th one. And tonight's one is about understanding our climate impact or assessing our impact. So are there any questions before we start? Okay, can't see anybody's hand or anything. So let's get going. So as I say, tonight's session, the aims of tonight's session, so it's called Assessing Our Impact. And we're looking at a variety of things. Also, I'll be introducing, talking about sustainability and what sustainability is, understanding our climate impacts and why it's important to know that. And we're going to talk about measuring our carbon footprint and what that is. And we're having a go at it as well. So I hope you brought some data along with you. We're going to see if the way that we measure our CO2 emissions is the same for people as it is for business. And we'll also look at the community impact as well. So, you know, are we aware of what the footprint is for Wellingborough, for example, and the UK's and the global's footprint, the global footprint. We're going to think about what we can do to reduce our impacts on the climate, on CO2 emissions and on the earth, and consider the whole environmental impact, you know, about moving to more sustainable ways of living, and also how we know how well we're doing, you know, what we can do to think about that. So there's some of the things we're going to do tonight. Okay, so the first thing, and this is our first sustainability workshop. We've got another 6 of these looking at various aspects of our lives and work. So what does sustainability in respect of caring for the planet and each other actually mean, do you think? What does it mean? Because people use the term sustainability a lot, but what does it mean in relation to the planet and each other? Anybody got any thoughts on that?
Not using up too many of the Earth's resources.
Thank you. So sustainability.
An equilibrium, Marion. I'll dare you how to spell that.
So about balance.
Equilibrium. I can't even say it.
So not overusing resources.
And circularity, so things can go back into the cycle of life.
That's it. Any other thoughts about what sustainability in relation to the planet and each of us actually means? What do you think, Doreen? What do you think sustainability is about? You're probably muted because I can see your mouth moving, but I can't hear you.
Well, I weren't sure. I was just listening to what other people were saying, really.
So what do you think it might be?
Well, equilibrium, really. To sustain something is keep it right.
So what does that mean to you, equilibrium?
Well, to keep something stable.
Keep things stable. Stability. Okay, anybody else got any thoughts? Karen, have you got any thoughts, or Greg?
Well, normally sustainability is defined as using only that amount of resources that don't negatively impact future generations, something like that. So, in effect, we won't be overusing something, we'll be using as much as we need and then recycling it.
Future generations. Okay, thank you. Anybody else got anything else they wanted to say about what they think sustainability is?
Maybe looking after the biodiversity of the planet so it's still there for future generations.
Biodiversity. Okay. Thank you, everybody. So let's see what I wrote down. So I've done a few definitions here. Sustainability is about living in balance with each other, nature and the earth. So I think Jonathan said about equilibrium, and we're all going to practice pronouncing that. So it's about balance. It's living using the renewable produce of the earth, so that which the earth creates every year, and valuing all the resources and energy, skills and gifts of each other and the resources of the earth as well. Recognizing and respecting ourselves, other species, so that we can all be sustained, you know, and continue. Also thought sustainable living is about living. So living sustainably means living in such a way that we find a balance in all areas of our lives, living in harmony with others and the earth, and learning how to thrive together. So hope that pulls together a lot of what we've been saying, but you know, particularly, you know, not, it's remembering, I guess it's living from the revenue of the earth, not the capital of the earth, as it were. So some features of sustainable living then. So what do you think are the main ingredients of sustainable living, or a sustainable life, or sustainability? What would we, if we were trying to assess whether our lives are sustainable now, we must have a bit of a list in our mind of the kind of things that would show us that we were living sustainably. So has anybody got any ideas of the sort of things that we would be seeing if we were living sustainably?
Yes.
Go for it.
Everyone needs to keep their own balance sheet, what they use, and what they consume, and then what they put back in.
All right, so you'd say that people should keep a record. So how does that help? Is that, so we're tracking what we're doing, but what are we trying to get to in that scenario, Greg?
Well, we've got to find out what we're consuming, and if we're consuming above average for a normal person, then maybe we want to think about reducing that. So
an ingredient of a sustainable life would be that we're aware, we have an awareness of our impact on each other, or on the earth, on the ways we're living.
Well, yeah, if we're consuming something, then, and we want to be aware of the impact, then we need to look further down the value chain, or the process, and see what is happening down there. It can get quite involved, but essentially, as a person, I would want to know what I'm consuming and what I'm throwing away, or what I'm putting out, because putting out would be exhaust fumes from my car, waste, garbage, waste that I put in the recycling cans. There's other things anyway. Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much. Karen, you wanted to say something? What do you see as a main ingredient of sustainable life?
Well, I wasn't going to say that, but I was going to say that if we were living sustainably in our community, there wouldn't be food banks and people wouldn't be living in poverty, because we'd all be
So the reverse of that then is a sense of plenty, maybe, and a sense that everyone gets their needs met.
Well, getting these met, yeah. I don't know about plenty, but enough.
Oh, yeah. So the whole notion of enough, that everyone has enough.
I think that's a different sort of sustainability, Karen. There's like 3 types of sustainability. That's more of an economics sustainability.
That's fine though, that's fine, because, you know, I think what we're looking at is this not, I mean, I haven't put environmentally in this slide. I'm talking about sustainable living across the piece, so
that's what you
holistically.
asked, okay.
Yeah, so it's holistically sustainable. And that's the thing about sustainability, isn't it? Because people can use it in lots of different ways and it's a well-used term. So that's why I thought we'd have a discussion about it. So
Yeah.
Karen was talking about the notion of enough, and that everybody should have enough, so that they don't need to, nobody's living in poverty.
That could cover all 3, couldn't it? I suppose it's the economy, society, and the environment.
Yeah, because if you think about it, if we all lived by the motto of having enough, then maybe we wouldn't be overusing and overproducing and using vastly exceeding the, you know, production of things and the use of the earth's resources, to have more and more and more. So maybe it's fundamental, I think.
Yeah.
Is that what you wanted to say, Karen?
Yeah, that was it.
Thank you.
Something Greg said earlier was about knowing what other people have and being able to compare yourself with a data set. So have something to compare yourself with. It's all very well knowing what you're doing, but if you've got a handful of marbles and you don't know how many other marbles everybody else has got, it doesn't matter, does it, how many marbles you've got? But if you've got more marbles than somebody else, perhaps you fancy sharing.
So what's at the back of that though? What's the positive statement around that? So
You can
Mainly it's all
compare.
down to carbon, isn't it? How we're using carbon and how we're disposing of carbon, and all the ways that we're using carbon in our lives. Fuel, food, and energy, and I mean carbon is the main ingredient that we're dealing with, isn't it?
So is it going back to that sense of what Karen was talking about of enough? And, I mean, are you saying, Jonathan, about, say, with carbon emissions or CO2 emissions?
No, I was talking about benchmarking. You can benchmark yourself against anybody, but if you've got a target to go for or a mean average, you can work out sort of how you're doing against everybody else. I think Greg started to say that earlier.
Yeah, okay.
And then was sort of led down a different path. Okay,
so thank you for all of those. Is there any other thoughts about any other ingredients that we would expect to see if we woke up one morning and everything, the planet was all, and the way we're living was all sustainable? Are there anything else you'd hope to see in that sustainable world?
Active transport.
What does that mean?
Well, not using combustion engines to get around, walking, cycling, and
so people would be. So you'd look out your window and you'd see loads of people cycling and walking, and the cars have disappeared.
Yeah. I mean, maybe a few electric cars, but not too many. Or maybe public transport, maybe some electric public transport.
So that's what you'd see. You'd love to see more. Yeah, that would be your indicator that the world's become more sustainable. Anything else about anything else? Karen, you got your hand up again?
I'd see more animals and birds around and less extinction, because things are just becoming extinct because we're not as sustainable. And same with nature as well. Yeah. Plants, I mean.
Yeah, I think what goes hand in hand here with sustainability is this idea that as a country, we need to have growth, and things need to grow all the time, and population needs to grow, and the amount of mining needs to grow. But all of that world that we live in now is all about grow, grow, grow. And
So is it
and that
challenging? Is it
in
challenging
itself
the
is not
notion?
sustainable.
Is it challenging the notion of economic, unlimited economic growth?
Well, it's what is now known as donut economics. It was developed by Kate Rayworth. I'm just having a look at it at the moment, and it's very interesting, because if we keep on growing all the time, then we're just going to use more and more resources, and it's like a plane taking off that can never be allowed to land again. It can take off, which means, you know, you're doing whatever it is, like mining for chrome, but it can never land again because it's got to keep going higher and higher and higher. Otherwise, the whole system fails, which usually means a recession.
So it's coming back to the notion of having a sense of enough, you know, that we've grown enough, that the economy's grown enough, that people have got enough, maybe.
What essentially it means is, if you've got 1,000 people, then if you can work out the needs, if you can analyze and work out the needs of those 1,000 people and find all those resources and then recycle them, you never need to have any more than those resources that you've already identified in those quantities for that amount of people.
Okay.
And unless you want to have some sort of growth, then you do a little bit of growth, but then you get to that level and you reevaluate again what level of sustainability is possible, because you might have a little bit of growth and then you work out, oh, we're mining too much chrome, or it's having an effect on some families on that side. So then you'd have to reduce the amount of goods that you use or find alternatives.
Okay, thank you. Doreen, you had your hand up.
On mute, Doreen.
Yeah, no, I was thinking, if there was no waste, if everything could be used that we had, and there was no waste at all. I mean, even the things that you know, are thrown away, actually, it could be used. I think nearly everything could be used, and if there was no waste, that'd be a good idea.
Yeah, so if you opened your curtain on that morning, then you look out the window and you see that everything's being used and there isn't a pile of rubbish sticking by the bin.
Yeah, but the rubbish shouldn't be there. The rubbish that was there, I bet everything in it could be used somehow.
That's what I'm saying, that there isn't a pile of rubbish by the bin because people are using.
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Doreen. Judy, you had your hand up again.
Yeah, I was just thinking that probably there wouldn't be so much transport that you'd see out the window, because people wouldn't move around so much. I mean, if there's less economic growth, you know, less activity, people are happier to sort of stay put, not go on foreign holidays, and sort of do more things locally, really.
Okay.
Karen's still got her hand up from before. Are you there?
Hello?
I think I heard her open the back door. So
I just wanted to mention that not many people know that the Americans are actually very good at recycling their steel. They apparently recycle about 99% of their steel.
wow.
But they keep all these things secret from us because we like to think that we can do things better sometimes.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you everybody for your ideas. Just moving on to some of the things I wrote down about this. So if I woke up on that morning and opened my curtain, I'd hope to see, you know, for me, sustainable living is where we're all respecting and caring for each other, caring for people, caring for nature, caring for ourselves, giving each other time to live and to connect and be together, making the best use of all our resources, reducing, or as Doreen says, no waste, because making use of everything. I think also just on that, you know, if we were using everything and going back to what others have said, we could leave a lot more of the Earth's capital resources, everything under the ground, in the ground, because I'm sure if we lock the doors of Wellingborough tonight and other stuff couldn't come into our community, there'd be enough stuff here for us to share in one way or another around ourselves for a very long time. The things we might run short of would be food, perhaps, because of the way of our food systems, but in terms of other stuff. And I think actually probably during COVID, you know, I don't know about you, but obviously you couldn't get out to go buy shopping. Some people would have used the internet systems, but a lot of us didn't bother about buying a load of stuff. So actually the whole thing of leaving more of the Earth's resources in the ground would be another element, another indicator of us living more sustainably, because we're living in balance with the resources of the Earth and what the Earth produces each year, not drawing on its capital so much. I think a sustainable life would also show that we were sharing our resources, sharing our needs. You know, that old adage of a friend in need is a friend indeed. So you know, when people are in need, often it gives us a chance to contribute. And I think there's a strong human need to be able to help others, actually, as well as making best use of all the resources and the skills that we've got. I think our society would be much more collaborative, with work very much around cooperating with each other. So we're sharing everything, and less competition, you know, more of a desire to cooperate. I think we'd value time and energy more. It would be life living more in harmony with each other and with nature, and learning how to appreciate each other and nature better. I know a lot of people felt that during lockdown, being able to see and listen to nature, listen to the birds and see the way things were growing. And in my life, I've witnessed that at different times, not just during COVID. And I think we'd also see a better, because of that greater ability to listen to each other and see nature, we'd have a stronger connection with nature, because like or not, we are actually part of nature. So that strength and that connection to the earth is really important to us, although I'm not sure that everybody realizes that. And then finally, for me, it is understanding the magic of enough, having enough. I think in our communities, there's some people have got way more than enough, and others have clearly haven't got enough. So I'd like to look out that window and see everybody having enough, that the whole idea of food banks would disappear, but we might have something else. We might have food sharing places. We might have, like some of us talked about on Monday night, we might have places where people could share meals together, connect together, share our food and resources together. So it would look different, but it wouldn't be that hierarchy of you've got nothing, so you have to go to a food bank kind of idea. It would be more of a positive rather than this sense of a negative that you get with that. So I think you had your hand up again, Greg.
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment about competition. In essence, there's nothing wrong with competition, because competition essentially boils down to one person or a group of people comparing themselves with another person or group of people. What happens then is usually the problem, because then they get motivated emotionally on what to do about the differences in those comparisons. And that is where the problems usually start. But competition in itself is a good thing, because that helps you analyze, and people need to analyze, like we said earlier, people need to analyze what they're using and what they're putting out to be able to live a sustainable life.
I think there's also for me, that none of these are exclusive sort of, you know, there has to be a balance. I think the biggest thing about sustainability is balance and harmony. And I think it's appreciating cooperation much more than we do at the moment, and being more cooperative. I think the other thing I forgot to mention around this is actually, if I looked out that window, I'd see communities, I'd see people connecting with each other more, and people collaborating and helping each other more. So I'd see the re-emergence of communities and people wanting to be together. So yeah, so it's not about no competition. It's about perhaps more of a balance towards cooperation than we've got at the moment. Yeah, so it's actually quite a lot of things, and I haven't put this down in the slide, but I just wanted to say, you know, there's a whole range of so the UN has agreed a range of sustainable development goals, and I've been having a look at them recently. There's 17 of them, and a lot of them are cross-cutting. They're not just environmental goals, they're human aspirational goals about no poverty, no hunger, about people having a good education, everyone having good health and well-being, about people having a good opportunities to contribute to work, having a good living, having a good home to live in. So actually, if we thought holistically about this, there's so many different elements, as well as caring for each other and the planet. So just moving on then. So the climate emergency has really developed because we as humans have just not been living in balance. We've not been in balance with each other. We've definitely not been in balance with the earth and with nature. And we've tended to treat nature and the earth as just a place to exploit and to use and to draw on all the resources of that. And for a while, maybe that was possible, but you know, we've been doing this now for centuries. We've been living off the earth's capital for centuries. We've been, you know, the earth's revenue, i.e. the stuff that grows every year, we've usually used that resource. I mean, I did this talk about 20 years ago nearly. And at that time, we would have used all our natural resources, so the revenue of the earth, the things that grow every year, we often use all of that by, you know, spring. So within a couple of months, 3 or 4 months of the year starting. So our growth, our industrial growth, our civilization growth, everything, our growth of population has come off the back of using the finite resources of the earth. And you know, getting to this old adage from, what was his name? I can't remember his name. Darwin, you know, the survival of the fittest notion. And that's a shame. So, you know, we have got enough resources in the earth, and in terms of the growth, the annual growth of food on the earth at the moment, but we are not sharing it in the ways that we could. So we've ignored the signs of distress that we're feeling as people and that the earth is going through. And we're now facing the most urgent call to stop and to change. And that's the climate emergency that we're experiencing, and we have been experiencing for some time. So understanding our impact and why it's important. So the earth is warming every day through the increases in CO2 emissions and other carbon emissions. We contribute to these CO2 emissions either directly by our actions or through the actions taken by others on our behalf, like government, like industry, like business. If we can understand our personal and business impact, you know, we too can take action to help towards achieving the global goals of net zero and reducing our impacts on the earth around CO2 emissions, but also in many other ways around environmental sustainability. So, okay, then what is meant by net zero? What's that, do you think? And Anybody got any ideas? Net zero, commonly used term, but I just want to check that it's commonly understood as well. Judy?
Well, we are emitting the amount of carbon dioxide and equivalent that we emit is less than what is being used or sort of sequestered, or what I'm trying to say, our outputs of carbon are equal to our can't think of the words. The amount of carbon emissions are accounted for by the amount that we are using up, that we have that are being taken in by trees and so forth. I haven't put that very well, but you get the idea.
So do you think we are at net zero now?
No, we are not at net zero now. We are giving out a lot more than we are able to sequester, and we are not in balance. Net zero would be when we're in balance.
Okay, so and why is that important to aim for net zero, do you think?
Because the carbon dioxide and other carbon gases are making causing the atmosphere to heat up.
Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else want to say anything about net zero?
I'd like to say Judy put it beautifully.
It's the funny thing with all these things, we use the term so much that actually sometimes trying to put them into words, just not the easiest thing. So I had a go at that as well. So I'll show you what I've come up with. So net zero is what I'm thinking is the balance between the amount of CO2 emissions released into the atmosphere compared to the amount of CO2 emissions absorbed from the atmosphere in a given period. So whether it's a day, a week, a year, 25 years, it's about, again, coming back to the whole thing about sustainability, it's about balance.
Can I just pull you up on something, Marion? Your slides all say CO2e, which is carbon dioxide equivalent, which encompasses all of the different greenhouse gases. So, for instance, like methane will have a much bigger impact than, say, carbon dioxide. So that's like all greenhouse gases, basically.
But it still has to all be in balance, doesn't it? So it's still right.
Oh, it is. Yeah. No, it's just like I say, that things are measured in what carbon dioxide is, but like CO2e is specifically for all greenhouse gases. That's all. So just an interesting thing.
For example, carbon dioxide is 1 unit, and an equivalent methane unit is 20 times carbon, so it'll be 20.
Yeah,
because it's 20 times as bad.
It's okay. I was going to explain this in a minute. Actually, I've got some notes on that, but
okay, sorry, I
just under Jonathan, but never mind. That's okay.
No. It's just the slides all say something different to what you're saying. That's all. Just a bit confusing. That's all.
Okay. Right. So, is achieving net zero, is that going to be enough? Do you think? So, actually, our aim should be to achieve a significant rate of net negative.
Yeah.
So, we have got a massive level of, it's still exceeding CO2 emissions levels every year, even though we're reducing those, and you'll see that in a minute to some degree. We're still putting out CO2 levels above what might be considered to be an optimum level. Now, net zero gets us into balance between the amount of emissions that we're putting out and the amount that's then being absorbed back into the earth. But we've already got a big gap. We've already put out loads and loads and loads and loads of CO2 equivalent emissions over the last 200-300 years, and we've got to pull some of that back. So really, even though people talk about net zero, actually what we need to do is achieve net negative. So we need to be really, you know, we've massively overspent on the resources of the earth. We've drawn out loan after loan after loan after loan. And yeah, we might be reducing our, it's a bit like having arrears on your house, you know, if you're paying rent, you know, you've got a big arrear that's built up over time, and you might agree a repayment method that balances you for the day, but you still got to cover your arrears. So we've got to go back and do that. So we need to both radically reduce our present ongoing CO2 emissions and remove the very high levels of existing CO2 emissions already in the atmosphere to return us to safe levels. And just to be aware, I mean, we haven't been at safe levels of CO2 emissions since about the mid-1800s. And CO2 levels now are 50% higher than they were in pre-industrial times. So that was about the mid-1700s. So, and there's a picture showing it. So this is, I think this is the hockey stick picture. So you see at on the left-hand side, the pre-industrial level, we had 278 parts per million of CO2 emissions in the atmosphere, and it's now up around 417 parts per million. And you see the massive growth since 1960 as a result of the way we're living. So this is from the Met Office, this slide. However, in 2020, in terms of the UK greenhouse gas emissions, I'm going to have to move the thing here. So in 2020, the amount of tonnage, I'm going to explain a bit about these figures in a minute, but the amount of tonnage of CO2 emissions, that's million tons of CO2 emissions, you know, what's the word? Equivalent. Equivalent was 406, which was nearly a 9.5% reduction on 2019, which in itself, you know, that figure is also a 50% reduction on the 1990 figure in the UK, which was about 800 million tons of CO2 equivalent emissions. So we are making reductions in the UK, but I think none of us would be surprised at the drop in 2020, because a lot of it was to do with lockdown, wasn't it? To do with the various lockdowns we had and the way that our lives changed that year. And really it shows, if proof were needed, that when we did start to cut back, particularly on transport and industrial process and various other things, it's had a massive, significant impact on the emissions that year. So,
but we're not really, though, are we? Because we just farmed it all out to China and other developing countries, and then we're basically transporting it all from those countries to this country and creating more of a problem rather than less of a problem.
Yeah. So, in global terms, you know, I was looking at the global CO2 equivalent emissions, and at the moment, I think with last year's 2020 figure, there was, I mean, you know, some massive numbers, it's hard to know what they are, but it looked like nearly 36 billion tons of CO2 emissions across the globe. And I don't know where I've put it, but I think I worked out that our emissions in 2020 were about less than 1.5% of that total. So we are emitting, these from the figures I've found today. Well, you know, not an expert on all of this, but that's what I saw. I've been wandering around all the government websites in the last few days, and so obviously, but you'll see in a minute that there isn't one measure of CO2 emissions. There's 2 or 3, so we'll come on to that in a minute. But our figures for the UK form only less than 2% of the global emissions as they stand at the moment. But that you know, and that includes even at the highest point, which is the consumption rate, that supposedly includes the importing of products from other countries. But as you'll see, actually trying to see what's included in a carbon emissions calculation is not the easiest thing in the world to do. So, but hopefully I'm not boring you all here. Anyway, so measuring the carbon footprint. A carbon footprint is the measure of CO2 emissions produced into the atmosphere by a process or event or range of actions taken by a person, a business, community, industry, or country, or in fact the whole globe. There are many kinds of greenhouse gases, as people were saying, which are causing, I'll come to you in a second, Doreen, I'll just finish reading this. There's many kinds of greenhouse gases which are causing the earth to warm. The main one obviously is carbon dioxide. As a result, the greenhouse gas emissions are logged as being equal to CO2. So they're called CO2 equivalents, or CO2e. And as Jonathan was saying, there are many other greenhouse gases, including methane, nitrous oxide, and various things to do with fridges and other materials. And but everything gets equated to the CO2 emissions equivalent so that we can try and keep some sense of what we're trying to do. Otherwise we'll be a bit mad, really. Doreen, you had a question.
Yeah, I just wonder how these things are actually measured. I mean, with the temperature, well, you got a thermometer, but how's a carbon emission? How's it actually measured?
Right, well, we're going to go into that in a minute. So that was a good question. That's a very good question, because otherwise, yeah, we hear a lot about it, but you know, you can see, I mean, we've done a lot of work in the last few weeks about energy, haven't we, and understanding our energy use and how that's measured. But actually, you know, we also want to have these reductions, and we need to understand how it works. So hopefully you'll get a better sense of that through this session. Okay, so moving on then.
Yeah, okay.
So another definition around the carbon footprint is the best. So a carbon footprint is the best estimated measure of the total, whether it's direct or indirect, amount of greenhouse gas emissions by any item, activity, or individual, expressed in terms of tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So every action we take, every activity we do will have a certain level of carbon emissions attached to it because of you know, if we go because of the anyway, I'm coming to that. Yeah. How to explain this? Because the you know, if you're going out in your car, Doreen, and you use petrol, now you're going to be moving to electric vehicles soon. But if you use petrol emits CO2 and it emits other greenhouse gases as well when the combustion process happens and when the petrol is drawn from the earth as oil. So so many of we're so intrinsic, the expression of CO2 emissions and greenhouse gases is so intrinsic to the way that we live and the way our society runs that virtually everything we do has a carbon emission. And as a result, you know, we're trying to reduce those carbon emissions, but we need to understand that virtually everything does have that carbon emission. Now, maybe what we're trying to do is sometimes choose from the worst options and maybe choose a lesser option, because we are so embroiled in using and generating carbon emissions because of how we run our lives. So even when, you know, even if someone moves from a petrol car to an electric vehicle, they'll still be generating greenhouse gases and carbon emissions, but at a much lower rate, because you wouldn't be using petrol or diesel, but your car would still have to be made from resources from the earth, and also the processes to produce that car will use energy that often comes from fossil fuels. So there's a lot.
And we quite often get it wrong as well, don't we, Marion? Not
So
us. People quite often get it wrong as well, because we're all told to go for diesel because that was slightly less carbon footprint. but then it found that it was polluting everything else in different ways. And then we were going to go for biofuels, but that was scuppered. So,
and this is the thing. This is the challenge, because we're so in this system, and our system is completely built on the use of fossil fuels and other resources drawn from, finite resources drawn from the earth, that even when we come up with solutions, they're still going to be drawing from the earth's finite resources. So if you think about the battery to run an electric vehicle, the elements within that battery that enable that battery to exist will be coming from chemicals from the earth, what they're called, components from, I can't remember the word now. Yeah, from the earth. So it's just that hopefully we'll be using less of those resources from the earth than we are if we're using petrol and diesel. And I'm having fun explaining things as well, Judy. Anyway, so moving along. So defining carbon footprint approaches. So I've been doing a bit of work on carbon footprint approaches in the last 6 months, but particularly in the last couple of months. And what I discovered in that time is that there isn't just one, like the carbon footprint for the UK, there's not just one carbon footprint. And partially this is to do with, really this is to do with how we measure that footprint, how we measure our CO2 emissions and what we include in the measurement. Because I think at some point, so there's 3 systems that tend to be used, and I found a chart today from the government office, and that was the report talking about 2020, and they talk about 3 ways of mapping carbon emissions in the UK. So one way is a sort of territorial assessment of carbon emissions. So this relates to emissions from within the national boundaries of the UK. So not about any imports into the country, and Jonathan was talking about that earlier, not about any products that we import, it's just about the emissions that are used or generated from within the UK, the countries of the UK. But it does include products that are exported, because they started in this country. The second system is sort of residency-based CO2 emissions. These are emissions caused by UK residents and businesses, and that includes ones from the UK and abroad. And then the third one is consumption-based CO2 emissions. So this includes emissions from the consumption of goods and services by households in the UK. And again, I think that also includes emissions for services bought in the UK, but also any services brought from China or New Zealand or anywhere else in the world, so elsewhere in the globe, really. So there's those 3 measurements, and I had a look at a chart today. The only problem was there's some really good graphs on this chart, but I just couldn't see how to copy them across to these slides. But it showed a range in 2020. I'll go through that now. So looking at the carbon footprint for the UK then, with those 3 things in mind, the highest value relates to consumption CO2 emissions. So they're things that we're consuming in the UK and they may come from elsewhere in the world. And so I'll put 2022, but for 2020, this was approximately 700 million tonnes of carbon emissions were generated in relation to our consumption as UK residents and businesses. The residency emissions were approximately 450 million tonnes of carbon emissions, and the territorial emissions were 406 million tonnes of carbon emissions. But if I say, again, the figures have come down quite a lot in the UK since 1990, and significantly in the last few years as well, but there's still a long way to go. The UK is surprisingly, and I was surprised about this, well on the way to achieving its 3rd global set of CO2 reduction targets by 2024 from the stats I've seen today. So, that's good, but we've still got a lot to do, haven't we? The question is, though, are the global targets actually set at the right level? You know, I think they've been trying to set them at such a level that we can get to that, you know, reducing global warming to 1.5 degrees. But, you know, I think what I'm seeing from a lot of this stuff, and there's so much data to read through, that actually it's not always clear to me that everything is joining up, and maybe it does, but, you know, I haven't found all that yet. I see your hand, Judy. I just want to make the last point. So the UK's CO2 territorial emissions seem to make up less than 2% of the global CO2 emissions, as I said earlier. So we are making headway in the UK, but a lot of that was as a result, if I could show you the graphs, it was as a result of phasing out coal as such a large resource of power to us. Looking at the graphs, when you look at the percentage of different sorts of energy source, we're still using a large amount of gas to run our lives, and a large amount of, obviously less coal, but a large amount of petroleum and diesel to meet our needs. But, you know, the renewable energy sector is increasing. The thing is that it could be increasing much more. But anyway, Judy, you had a question.
Yes, you say that, you know, we are well on the way to sort of reducing our CO2 emissions, but I keep reading in the news about the government wants to sort of open exploration for new oil fields, new gas fields, possibly end the moratorium on fracking and so forth, which really is going to sort of send it all up again, isn't it? Yeah,
and you know, it does come down to, I mean, reading through some of this stuff, it's almost like you've got to do a degree on it, really. It is, there is questions really about how are we measuring what we're already saying. You know, there's got those three measures, but are we including everything that we're kind of responsible for on the earth in terms of emissions? And then secondly, yes, if we change the trajectory, if we start using more fossil fuels, if we start mining again for coal and other things, then we will start heading in the other direction again. And you know, clearly one of the drivers to this is the whole challenge around importing fossil fuel energy from other countries. And you know, I mean, I remember being at an event about 20 years ago with a gentleman called Richard Heinberg, who wrote loads of books about peak oil and various other things. And he said, you get to a stage when you've reached peak oil, which we have well past now, you get to a stage where the resources, those fossil fuels are only, the high percentage of those resources are in areas that are highly politically sensitive or are geographically harder to get to. And you need such a high intensity of energy to get those resources out of the earth, like fracking, for example. So that's the problem. And you know, when we could be using the difficulties that we're facing at the moment as a real fill up to encourage more, you know, to develop more renewable sources of energy. And it's not like we haven't got the answers to do that, have we? We know what we need to do. But yeah, so that's the concern, is that with short-term pressure, or maybe long-term pressure, that they go back to old habits, and may, you know, they could see even old coal mines being reopened, but I don't know. I mean, hopefully not. But anyway, moving on.
Greg has asked about 10 minutes ago, what time was that tea break supposed to be?
Oh, right, I don't know. Then we got an idea what the time is.
Quarter past, you said about 8 o'clock.
Oh, right, okay. I'll just mention about this, and then we'll have a go at doing these calculations afterwards. So mapping our personal carbon footprints, or CO2 equivalent footprints. There are many calculators available to do this on the internet at various places. We've found a few, but the answers that come up seem to be very different, and that's because the systems, you know, the process of method of working it out you know, it's not clear when you're using the tool. So understanding the method to work it out ourselves seems an important thing to do, you know. So and that's a way that we can check if the government and others and businesses or ourselves are actually really including all the emissions that we're actually responsible for as well. So we're looking to, so I've been trying to understand these methods, and I've been helping Glamis Hall for All sort of map their carbon emissions. And we're looking to sort of develop something that is straightforward that we can use as individuals and maybe as businesses as well. But just to say then, with those emissions, I think calculating CO2 emissions really breaks down into 3 categories. It's the emissions that we generate ourselves directly, and in business terms, they're referred to as Scope 1 emissions. There are emissions we cause to happen that are still part of our lives, and in business terms, that's called Scope 2 emissions. And then there's emissions from products and services that we buy, or how they get to us as well. So it's not just buying. So if you're buying a new laptop, it's not just the emissions within the laptop that cause the laptop to be created. It's also the emissions getting that product to our homes or our businesses. And they're called Scope 3 emissions. And in business terms, that refers to the supply chain, and also the indirect emissions from the supply chain, and then the indirect emissions that follow when we pass our products on to people or customers. So this model, this way of looking at things, uses the system used by government and business, which is the Scope 1, 2 and 3 approach about mapping emissions. Okay, so I'm going to pause there, and so people can have a little break. Okay, so just to recap on this then, so to do the calculations for your carbon emissions or your carbon equivalent emissions, so let's think about this. So it's CO2 emissions that we generate or use directly. So that could be our gas usage, our electric usage, emissions that we cause to happen. So in relation to business, that's usually services that are provided for us to help us run our business. So in a way, it could be the same for our own homes as well, you know. And then emissions from products or services that we buy and how they get to us as well. And also how we dispose of them too, actually. So, and that footprinting can either be for a business or for a country or for an individual person or family. So there are a few calculators. I'm going to guide you through. Now we can either do this together with you watching me do this, or we can do it. You can have a go at doing it yourself, because if presumably you've either all got an iPad or a computer with you, we can have a go at the footprint from the World Wildlife Fund. Now it's a good thing to do. It's like a questionnaire, but it doesn't. The only problem is it doesn't tell us how it calculates what we come up with. But it's worth having a look. So, I mean, either people can do it on their own, or you can watch me doing it. What would everybody prefer?
Watch you do it. I might understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's better if we watch you do it, because it's very confusing the first time you do it.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I'm gonna retake the questionnaire because I did this earlier. So it's, you know, well, we didn't do it. I think I printed my answer off from before. So we're going to retake the questionnaire. So this questionnaire, so we can do it on. I'm going to do it on Doreen. This is your footprint, Doreen. Is that all right with you?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go through a range of questions, and if you tell me, most of them will only have one answer out of a list, but you know, some you can say more than one answer. So the first one is, how would you best describe your diet? Let's read all of them first. Is it meat at every meal, or is it meat at some meals? Is it no beef? Is it meat very rarely? Or are you vegetarian, or are you vegan? Which one do you think best fits with you?
Meeting some meals.
We'll click that one then. Okay, in a week, how much do you spend on food from restaurants, canteens or takeaways? Which are those? Is it nothing? £1 to £10, 10 to 60 or more?
In a week on a restaurant? Oh, I don't always go out in the restaurants. If I do, it might
As
be
an
1 to
average. As an average.
maybe 1 to 10.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll do 1 to 10. Okay,
Could be Greg's or the chip shop as well, I guess.
that's right. Of the food you buy, how much is wasted or thrown away? Is it none? Up to 10%? 10 to 30% or more than 30%?
Usually it's none.
Yep. Okay. How often do you buy locally produced food that is not imported to the UK? So do you buy, in other words, yeah, how often do you provide locally sourced food? So a lot of food I buy is locally sourced, in other words, or some of the food I buy is locally sourced. I don't worry about where it comes from. Which is it? I mean, you get most of your stuff from a supermarket, do you, or do you get?
No, I usually get it from supermarket, and I don't really think where it comes from. I just look at the price, and if I fancy it, I get it.
Fair enough. What kind of vehicle do you travel in most often as a driver or a passenger?
Well, in a car.
Okay. Which of these best describes the vehicle you use the most? An electric car, a plug-in hybrid, a hybrid car, a small petrol or diesel car, a medium petrol or diesel car, or a large petrol or diesel car?
A small petrol.
Okay. How many hours a week do you spend in your car or on your motorbike? Yeah, how much time do you spend on your motorbike, Doreen?
Yeah.
Commuting.
In the car, actually in the car, driving.
Oh, yeah, but or driving to, you know. So are you? Is it under 2 hours a week, or is it 2 to 5, or is it 5 to 15? Because you might do a lot of trips.
Well,
it might be short trips. So
yeah, maybe 2 to 5 then.
okay. And how many hours a week do you spend on the train, commuting anywhere?
Well, I don't.
Yeah, fair enough. How many hours a week do you spend on the bus, getting anywhere?
Well, I don't.
Okay. And in the last year, how many return flights have you made in total from the following locations? Domestic, to Europe, or anywhere else? It's probably zero.
None.
None. No.
None.
So we'll leave those as none. Actually, I just want to go back just to check that that is none. Yeah, so right. Yeah. Just check it's added it's none. Okay. What percentage of flights do you offset? Well, they're not applicable, are they? Because you don't do
No.
it. What kind of house do you live in? Is it a detached, semi-detached, terraced, or flat?
Semi-detached.
That's it. How many bedrooms does your house have?
3.
And how do you heat your home? Gas.
Well, gas, yeah.
Is your electricity on a green tariff?
I don't know really. I think it is, but I don't know.
Okay. Do you regularly turn off lights and not leave your appliances on standby, Doreen?
All of them except for the television, because I don't know how to turn it off. I have to leave it on standby.
Do you regularly turn off your lights? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And how warm do you keep your home in the winter? Is it below 14 degrees, 14 to 17, or 18 to 21, or over that?
No, if it's cold, 18 to 21.
Yeah. Which of these energy efficiency improvements have you installed in your home? And you can have any of these. So have you got energy saving light bulbs?
Yes.
loft insulation,
Yeah.
cavity wall insulation, I don't know,
No, can't have it.
condensing boiler.
Is that the gas boiler I got?
I don't know, is it? I don't know if it's again, I think it might be condensing.
Probably, yeah.
Has it got a tank? If it's got a tank, then it's not condensing.
All right, so
If it's what?
has it got a tank, Doreen?
No.
All right, so it's not condensing then.
No. So it is.
It
It
could
is
be
condensing.
condensing if it hasn't got a tank, but it might not be, obviously.
Has it got a tank, Doreen?
No, it's not got a tank.
Okay. Double glazing. Have you got your double
Yes.
glazing yet?
Yeah.
Low flow fittings on taps and showers.
Low flow tap. Oh,
It's
I
a
don't
little-
know.
A little device you can attach. And you haven't
No.
got solar panels or water heaters, have you?
No.
Right. Okay. Nearly there. In the last 12 months, have you bought any of these new household items? Have you bought a TV, a laptop, or a computer? Any large items of furniture?
No.
Washing machine, dishwasher, tumble dryer, fridge, freezer?
No.
Have you bought a new mobile phone or a tablet?
No. I bought a new electric kettle because the other one broke, and a new microwave. That's not on it.
No, I haven't got those. So
Mhm.
in a typical month, how much do you spend on clothes and footwear?
In a month? Oh,
Yeah.
not much. £1 to 60, but I don't even spend that in a month.
Well, we could say zero. couldn't
Probably nothing, yeah.
we? In a typical month.
No.
What about pets? What do you spend on pet? Is it more like that one?
Yes.
Yeah. And how much do you spend on health and beauty and grooming products?
What, for the dog or for me?
Brilliant. For you.
Nothing.
How much does your haircut cost, Doreen?
0 to 10.
And in a typical month, how much do you spend on the phone, internet, and TV contracts?
Yeah, it's brilliant.
No.
That's
On the phone is £75 a month. That's TV and
no,
phone.
it's
and
this one then,
internet.
isn't it? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. In a typical month, how much do you spend going down the gym, the cinema, books, or newspapers, gardening, computer games?
Well, I only go to the exercise class. £3 a week.
Yes.
So £12.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
you do your gardening, don't you? And, well,
I don't. Yeah.
so
I don't-
you want the first one,
Yeah.
okay? And which of these types of waste do you recycle or compost? So do you recycle all of this stuff?
Well, I don't waste any food really because the dog eats what I don't eat.
Yeah, I'd say you do all of that.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Yeah, you live in the UK, so that's fine.
Yeah.
I'll just put the first part of your postcode in. And then we get the results, see what the score is. Well, there you go, Doreen, this is your score. Right, so your carbon footprint at the moment, according to the World Wildlife Trust, is equal to 11.3 tonnes. Okay, now, according to this chart here next to it, if you see that, the UK average footprint is 9.5 tonnes per capita. But I was reading this book, I'm going to wave in front of you now. It's called How Bad Are Bananas?
I've got one of them too.
Yeah, and it was produced in 2020, and that says that the average carbon emissions per UK household is 13 tonnes, and it used to be 15 tonnes 10 years ago. So this is a thing we've got to be mindful of. Your footprint is.
How is that measured? That's what I don't know. But do they get can't get a thermometer? Do they get a jar full of air and measure it, or how's it measured?
I think this is it. I'm going to show you that in a minute. Okay, I'll show you what we did for an organisation I was helping, and we're going to just use a few examples. We'll do a bit of a, in fact, we could try and do your, well, a little bit of your thing on this. Have you got your gas and electric bill to hand? Or?
No.
Oh, right. Well, we'll use somebody's figures.
I can tell you how much I spend a month on it.
No, I don't want to know the money. It's more the kilowatt hour.
Oh,
Anyway,
no.
so as it stands at the moment, according to this, I mean, there must be some way, some method behind this. So I'd like to see that, and that's part of what I've been trying to do the last few weeks. But so according to this, your thing is a bit 120% of the UK, so it's 20% higher than the UK average. Doesn't say what the world average is. Breaks down that your consumption, so this is sort of telling you that 51% of your emissions come from your consumption at home, based on the average annual car emissions. So it's saying about home, your consumption is equal to 2 small cars, all right. So your home consumption is 51% of your carbon footprint. Your travel is 17% of your carbon footprint. Your food usage and buying is 18% of your carbon footprint. And your buying of stuff is 14% of your carbon footprint. I did mine earlier. If I can find it.
Sorry, that doesn't really make sense in some ways, because if you're saying about shopping, some people might go for a few little bits of shopping, like mum, and some people will get trolley loads of things. So I think that seems a bit, yeah.
I think this has been,
That's only 14% though, isn't it? The trolley loads of stuff. Like the other bits is what's making the difference, I think.
I know,
yeah,
but
I think one of the problems with
the most people, to be
yeah,
honest.
one of the problems with the World Wildlife chart is that we just don't know how they're calculating it. They're asked questions, but we don't know where they're putting the figures, and we don't know. Yeah, so I'm going to show you a sort of rough and ready method in a minute, but I wanted to show you this tool because a lot of people use it just as a guide for them. So I better move on for that. And apparently your tons of, if this is accurate, Doreen, your 11.3 tons of carbon emissions each year is roughly the weight of 2 savannah elephants. It's a good idea.
Oh, wow.
And according to the guy from the banana book, a lot of people he said a lot of people have a problem trying to perceive what a ton of carbon actually looks like. He said if you fill, if you filled a couple of standard size garden water butts to the brim with petrol, set them on fire, about a ton of carbon dioxide would be directly released into the atmosphere. So that's what a ton of carbon dioxide looks like. Okay, so we're going to pause on this one. I'm going to stop sharing it. So everybody's seen that, and I'll put a link on the slides to this website if you want to have a go at this yourself, but it's not always easy. It's a bit, unfortunately, this method is a bit of a blunt instrument, really. That slide, yeah. So we've looked at the World Wildlife Fund. There's one for business, which was quite, it does the sort of the scope 1 and the scope 2 figures, which is really about energy use. But I'm going to show you, because we're running out of time a bit, and I've got these links on here, so you can, when you get these slides, you'll be able to go and have a look at these things yourself. But I'm going to show you a bit of a freehand method that I've created. Now, I'm going to just ignore this sentence at the bottom of the average global CO2 emissions, because I saw that today is presently about 4 tons across the earth, but that's not what he said in the book. He said it's a bit more than that. So anyway, but whatever it is, we need to halve it by 2050 to help achieve the goal, stop the earth warming beyond 1.5 degrees. So this is a little spreadsheet that I've created. I was using to help Glamis Hall map their carbon footprint. And basically, as I said in that slide a bit earlier, we all need to look at, if we're mapping our carbon footprint, we're looking at the things that we directly buy, or the energy and the resources that we directly buy and emit, and sorry, the energy that we use that emits carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, and also the products that we buy and the services that we buy and where they come from. So there's 3 scopes. So I'm doing this as a business, but I think we could use this as well as a personal thing, which I'm actually working to create a little tool to do that. So it's a little spreadsheet, it's got all the little calculations on, and we're just going to have a quick look at this. So this business is called Any Other Business Limited. Very, you know.
You took ages over thinking about that.
Yeah, I did. That's right.
There you go.
And it produces and sells items to the community.
Okay.
It uses gas every year, and in 2021 it used 13,000 kilowatt hours of gas, and it used 1,000 litres of petrol, because people working for that company were driving around doing the work to sell those products or services, or buy supplies or whatever. I just want to show you this column here. So you said at the beginning or earlier, Dawn, you said, how is it calculated? So I'm going to show you, simple thing now, how it's calculated. So this column here talks about emission factors. So basically, lots of products and services, particularly what the government has done is done a chart of electricity, gas, diesel, various other fuels and energy sources, and the average carbon emissions of those things. And they call this chart an emission factors chart, and they update that chart every year. So these figures here are the factors that you use to tell you how much emissions per kilogram of carbon dioxide equivalent is used for every, either every litre of petrol or every kilowatt hour of gas, or down here for electricity, every kilowatt hour of electricity. So these factors are worked out every year, and a new chart is added to the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, to the government's website. So that gives us a reference system to use to help us work out the carbon emissions, because otherwise we'd have to sit and work it all out for ourselves. And so this is a really helpful tool for people and businesses to work out around energy use and fuel use. Now, I'm looking for a similar system for when we buy products, because basically every product and service will also have its average carbon emissions. And in this book that I was waving around a minute ago, called the Banana Book, How Bad Are Bananas? This also gives a bit of a system that you can use to calculate the emissions that come from various products, and various types of products by category, and I'll go on to that in a minute. So to calculate the carbon emissions produced by using 13,000 kilowatt hours of gas, you times the amount of gas you use by the emission factor, and that gives 2,000 kilograms of CO2 emissions equivalent. Do people get that? Are people understanding that? Does that make sense? So, and for petrol, so the emission factor for natural gas is 0.2. For petrol, it's 0.24 in 2021. So that's 1,000 litres of petrol used at that emission factor generates 240 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. And then you add the two things together and you get 2,840 kilograms of carbon dioxide emissions at scope 1. For scope 2, you're looking at the electricity that you use. And this business used 40,000 kilowatts of power in the year. The emission factor for electricity is 0.21. So that means it's generated 8,493 kilograms of CO2 emissions. And then you add the two things together, and then you get 11,333 for that part of their organisation. Are people understanding that? So basically,
I can understand what you're saying, working it out, but I still don't know how they got it at the beginning, the DEFRA emissions. How do they work it out?
this chart, this emission factors.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they've done, because they've been, I mean, I can't answer directly, Doreen, but they've taken a range of commonly used energy sources, and they have worked these factors out, and then they put them into a chart. But like the emission factors, if we were doing this 10 years ago, those emission factors would be much higher, because the UK industries have managed to reduce, because we're using more renewable energy. The emission factors for electricity, for example, are much better, you know, so it's much lower now. So what that's saying is, for every, I don't know, kilogram of power that you're using, it generates 0.21 emissions, CO2 emissions. So they've been using a system. They've created this system ongoing. So somebody has sat, I mean, I tried to do this for Glamis the other day, and you have to sit down and work out what emissions are being generated and how to allow for that when you're doing a journey, for example. It's not easy, because it's not like one, I mean, these things are quite straightforward in a way, because it's like, it's the emissions from the gas, but within that will be the gas, not just the gas burning, but also the gas production. It will also include an amount for the gas extraction, because energy is used to extract the gas from the earth, as well as make sure it's delivered to your business or your home. So it's quite a complicated process of calculating, and I can't explain the method of that. But because it's complicated, what they're trying to do is make it straightforward for people and businesses to work out their own things. So that's why they're doing these scales every year, and they're accepted scales. So emission factors are accepted by the government when you're calculating, because big businesses have to calculate their carbon emissions, and they have to create a carbon reduction plan now. So they're using the system created by government to help them. I hope that's a bit of an answer. I'm sorry if I can't go any further, but just...
No, you can't answer it, I suppose they can't, because it's a government that's doing it, but I just wonder how they work it out.
Well, yeah, but maybe that's a question for that.
That's something you
can't
answer.
Yeah, it's going to be, I know it's going to include a variety of things, but they are trying to put it into a scale that we can then use.
Things change, don't they? I think that's what you're trying to say with these numbers, is that perhaps where we get our gas from has come from a different place before, so it has to come further or come less far, so the emission factor is bigger. And petrol isn't really all petrol anymore, is it? It's got other things added to it to make it burn less dirty, to put it, I don't know, any more clumsy I couldn't make it. But so for instance, like your petrol when you were doing it in the 80s was 4-star or 2-star, and every time a car went past you coughed. Now you don't tend to, do you? So that's why
unless you live in London.
there is a difference. Well, yeah, because it builds up, doesn't it? But
I think they're good questions. I've explained it as far as I can, Doreen.
Yeah, I understand you're working out. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I think there's some things that we have to take. I mean, we can do more work on it, but without sending ourselves mad.
I think it's complicated enough.
Yeah, exactly. without sending ourselves mad, sometimes we just have to take the given figure and then go from there. At least we can see that. When we did the wild wildlife thing, they will have those factors built in, but we can't check if it's up to date or not. You know, we can't.
No.
This at least tells me I know I got that figure off the government website and it relates to 2021. I don't know from the World Wildlife Chart what their figures were, how they've calculated them, and where they got them from.
No.
So at least this is a bit more transparent. So anyway, that are people then happy with you know, how those scope 1 and scope 2 figures are calculated and added together? Now we're going to look at, okay, so these scope 1 and scope 2 is really about energy usage. Okay, so you could just as easily put your anybody got their bill with them and they can tell me how much gas they used in a year?
I can tell you almost to the day because I've got a smart meter, Marion. We had that conversation before.
Yeah.
Whilst we're on that, I did a quick WWF thing and I got 6.4 tons, by the way.
Oh, wow.
So, and that's only that much because I've recently got a new laptop and a fridge. That would have been less because, like I say, the other ones were about sort of 15 years old. But anyway, happy days. Let's have a look at the gas or electric, Marion.
Either. Well, both actually.
Some people are so demanding. Right, okay. So my meter read on my electric 3625 last June. I'm giving you meter readings. That's the same thing, isn't it, basically?
No, on your bill, it will tell you your annual consumption somewhere on the bill.
Marion, you're putting that in gas, you said electric.
All right, anyway, I'll take that out.
I'm just about to work it out for you if I can find a pen. So excuse my armpit for a minute.
Well, I know, I'll do ours while you're working yours out. I know, I think our gas for the year, what was our gas for the year? It was about 9,000, wasn't it, Karen?
I thought it was less than that, wasn't it?
Well, we'll say it's 9,000 because it's just putting figures in, really. And I know with our car, so I worked out earlier, it's about 600 litres over the year. So that's that. And then our electric was 2500. So just on our power usage, our emissions are 2,475 kilograms of CO2 emissions equivalent. Ignore this scope 1, scope 3 thing for a minute. So that's on just on our power usage. Have you found yours, Jonathan?
Yeah, yours seem to be quite a lot more than mine, which is a bit of a worry for you, I guess. The electric is 3117.
Yeah.
And the gas is bar a couple of points. Where are you? 1,000 and crikey. No, it's not even 1,000 and something. It's 950.
On your gas? You sure?
95. Yeah, 95. We don't have it on.
Annual consumption.
A year.
Yeah, the meter reading was 1286 last July. It's 2238 this June. So that's a year, isn't it? So yeah, about 950 according to that.
No, there's no gas, you see, that's not on the meter reading because they have to convert it to kilowatt hours. So on your bill, it will say your annual consumption somewhere. Don't do the meter readings because it's straightforward with electric, but with gas, it's not. They have to convert it because it's done in cubic, whatever it is. And then they convert it to kilowatt hours. So.
Many bills up. Let's see if it works.
Got a very small footprint, if that's right.
Sounds good to me, doesn't it? It's just my bills are small. I've opened a different bill up. There we go. No.
They should have on there, on that bill somewhere, your annual consumption on every bill, really.
No, it hasn't said on either bill so far. I'll keep on looking, Marion. Oh, estimated annual
Yeah.
usage is 13,003 kilowatt hours. So that's
Do you
quite a
want-
lot different, isn't it?
You want
So
to read the numbers out?
13,000 basically.
Do you want to read the numbers out for me? 30
No, 13003.
13003. So that's 13,000.
But that's estimated. They're well above what I actually use, but there we go.
All right. When did you last do a reading?
Well, I'm about £450 in credit at the moment, so I'm probably the only person in the UK to have like a credit on my bill.
Just
But
put
go with
13.
what they say, just to give you an idea.
Okay. In terms of your petrol, do you use petrol or diesel in your vehicles?
Both. I fill my car up. Well, I don't fill it up at all at the moment because I'm using my electric scooter. So I suppose you can say this year we've filled up the van probably once. So that's a 50 litres. And the little car probably gets filled up. That's a lot less. I think that's about 30 litres that get filled up about once a month. So
360.
if you like, yeah, 300, and like I say, slightly difficult sort of circumstances. I'd normally fill up the van probably once every month and a half because I don't use it that much anyway.
So for an average year when you haven't been incapacitated, say last year, 2021,
We're probably talking about, say, 50 litres a month, say 50 and 120, 120 petrol, 50 diesel.
so
But
50
like
a
I
month.
say,
So 50
yeah.
a month is 600. And then what was the other one?
Actually, no, I'm wrong, aren't I? Yeah, say 50-50 actually, because my wife does now have to go into Milton Keynes a bit more.
So 50, so 600
50
a year
diesel and 50 petrol
per month.
per month. Yeah.
So that's 1,200 then.
Yeah.
Okay. So your emissions then just on your scope 1 and scope 2 will be 3,549 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. Okay, that's for your power and your fuel use. Is that all right? Is everybody getting this? Okay, so it becomes a bit more complicated when you think about products and services. So I'm going to, so if we were just doing this for a business, so if this was any other business again, any other business will go out and buy products and services from people up its supply chain. The idea with scope 3 is that you're looking at the emissions related to things that you buy and then are delivered to you. And you can look at the emissions related to your customers, maybe coming to your organization or whatever. They talk about 4 tiers. So there's like, it's a bit like genealogy, you know, or genealogy. So your tier 1 is where you bought the services from or the product from. The tier 2 is where they bought the product from. Tier 3 is where they bought the product from, etc., etc. Now, big companies are required to work all the tiers back. So back 4 tiers to see their carbon emissions, and they're encouraged to put systems in place to do that. Small companies don't have to do that. So I've been doing this for Glamis Hall, and we were advised we only needed to do to tier 1. So it's organisations that Glamis Hall bought products and services from, and the emissions that relate to that. So if so here I've put an example. I haven't put, so that I would put the name of the supplier in here, where they are, how often I buy that product or service from them, the number of items that I'd buy, the cost of those items, and it's not individual items, you know. If you're buying, like if you run a cafe and you're buying a crate load of beer, you'd sort of look at number, you know, it'd be per order. So you'd work out the cost per order. So you might have bought 10 crates of beer or whatever. What the banana book does, so this is for you, Doreen. What the banana book does, it's got a little chart. Remember I talked about emission factors on scope 1 and scope 2. For scope 3, we have to work out the emissions as they might relate to a product or service. I haven't found, other than this book with its system, I haven't found another system for this, but I think there is one. I just need to spend a bit more time to do it. And what I did for the Glamis Hall stuff was put down the name of a supplier, their location. I'll explain why for that in a minute. I put down the items that were bought and the cost of those items. We then put them under categories, and that's what it does in the banana book. So I don't know, if you buy a box of paper, that could come under, there's different service headings in the banana book, and you put it into that. So let's say we bought 10 crates of pop, or 10 cartons of 10 trays of pop for another service provider, and so that would come under, that's a food and beverage service, and the carbon factor, or what the equivalent of that, is 0.28. So remember the carbon emissions on the other page. This is the similar thing on here, but this is worked out per pound, and I'm not going to try and explain it to you, but just understand it's a similar way of working out the emissions as to using the carbon factors as in the other scope 1 and scope 2 stuff. So in this case, if you bought, I don't know, some legal advice from a legal services company, the factor that you have to add to that is 0.07. So the total cost of that item, then the total CO2 emissions related to that item would be 0.9 kilograms of CO2 emissions. Is this making any sense? Yeah. So basically all we're doing this is the same, but this calculating this is related to the amount of money it costs. And that becomes the kind of equivalent. So basically to get that figure, you times the cost of the item by the factor that you're using, the CO2 emissions factor that you're using, and you get this. So that gives you the figure for the actual product or service itself, but you've got to get it to your place, haven't you? You've got to get it to your place of whether your work or your home. So you also need to add in an equation about the distance to get it to you and how it got there. So that's why we were taking a note of the location or the postcode. Then I would work out, because I could work out the mileage then. So say you bought something from a shop in Northampton and they posted it to you, work out the mileage, and then again you times use these emission factors with travel from DEFRA to work out the CO2 emissions. So this is a health service. Let's see, a health service. So say you got training for your staff about your care service that you provide to people, or your health service that you provide to people. The trainer has to come to the building. They travel 74 miles to get there. And that's the emission factor. Remember, now that is exactly the same as on the other chart. And then that calculates your CO2 emissions. So when you're buying products or services, you're not only putting down your emissions for the actual product and service to create it, but also to get it to where you are as well. Does that make sense to people?
Yeah.
Okay, now this chart was mapping the money that the business spends in terms of revenue, but it also logs when it bought big items, so that's called capital spending. And I worked those out, and they come into this chart down here. So basically you add those two together and you get your emissions. But for what I'm going to do is turn this into something that people can use, and it would just be one chart. You could do a list of all the things that you buy if you want. What we decided to do about Glamis was only log spending above £200, because basically it's a lot of work to log every single item, and it doesn't actually change your CO2 emissions that much. So, you know, so we can work out a little tool, but when you add it all together, there's a few other things that you add in as well at scope 3, is about your mileage for your staff to get to work, your mileage for any volunteers or board members to get to the place of your business, and also your emissions in relation to waste that you're disposing of. Anyway, you add it all together, that's the figure it comes out with, and you've only mapped it to tier 1. So it's one level of organisation that you're getting the service from. If we did this ourselves as individuals, so this would be when we go and buy stuff from Tesco's, or we buy stuff off the internet, or, you know, you buy stuff off Amazon or whatever. When I did this work with Glamis, we were logging those sort of orders, and you can see what we're able to see with Glamis is that half of the stuff they buy is from local suppliers, at least at tier 1 anyway. So, and then you put those two figures together, so your scope 1 and scope 2 figures, and then you get the total of your emissions for that. So remember, we were doing this for any other business, but these figures here are Jonathan's electric and power usage, aren't they, and fuel usage. Numbers isn't easy, is it? Methods, especially when someone's describing it. Doing it yourself is more straightforward.
It's really difficult trying to work out how all these calculations are done in the conversion factors. It's really so much easier just accepting that the way it's being done is accurate. But still, it doesn't help then, because then you don't know, you know, maybe because you're really interested, you know, what is being calculated, because in your own calculations, you might want to go and put some of those things in, like other energy use and other water consumption and waste disposal and all of that. Yeah. And then you're doubling up on things. So it is tricky, and I can understand why you would want to know about those things. But if you're not going to calculate your own carbon footprint, it's probably easier just to leave it up to Marion, and Marion will ask you questions, and you
leave it up to Marion.
Understand? Yeah, no, you can start a business with that, you know.
I think the thing is, though, that you know, to a certain extent, it's helpful to know what I mean, for a business, many businesses, particularly the big ones, have to know what their emissions are, and they have to have a plan to reduce them. And what we're trying to find out is what are our emissions, and can we create a plan to reduce our own emissions by changing our behaviour, by being aware of that. And I think what I want to try and get to, when we're not quite there yet, is a way of creating a system that is straightforward, you know. But let's think about this practically. If we're saying that a debt that we incur in terms of emissions is because we buy a lot of stuff and we use a lot of services, it is going to take a while to be able to work out the emissions that are related to things that we do. And this is part, you know, we spent the last few weeks looking at our energy use, didn't we, and how to save energy and all the rest of it. And maybe by looking at your bills, maybe by having a greater sense of what you're using power on, and we're all having to do that more, aren't we, because of the costs. If we were charged for our emissions, we would soon start to really work out how our emissions are, how we calculate those emissions. It would become more important for us to do that, I think. Yeah. Sorry, Greg.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on something, Marion, that Doreen mentioned earlier, and I think it's quite important. there was some questions that you were asking Doreen, and it was to do with, is she aware of where the product that she's buying, of which country it comes from? And Doreen says, well, no, she never looks at it. But I think the most important thing is to raise awareness that people do need to start looking at where things that they're buying come from.
Yeah.
Because, for instance, let's take pork or bacon. I know that the bacon that I buy comes from Denmark and it's not too far away. But I would get a bit worried if the pork was coming from China. You know what I mean? It's a lot more distant away from the UK. And I would want to know why the bacon isn't coming from Denmark when, you know, everything's good with Denmark.
I think the this is the important thing about mapping our carbon footprint is it is us understanding the things that we are supporting. You know, if we are supporting buying a load of food regularly from Australia or New Zealand or South Africa or China, or products from those countries, then our carbon footprint is going to be massive. When I was doing this course the other week at Cranfield University, the Scope 3 stuff is the area where you get your flights bringing in your products from other countries. And, you know, it seems the area we've got least control over, but actually it's the area that's enabling this big consumption of products and use of fuel and various things around the world. I mean, if we went back 200 years, a lot of the ways that we met our needs would be met within a 10, 30 mile an hour radius of our homes, 30 mile radius of our homes, or at least in this country. Whereas now we're meeting our needs from products created all around the world, and they have to be shipped all around the world or flown all around the world. Yeah. So the carbon footprint can be a way, if we create a system that's transparent, of showing us that we are responsible, what we individually are responsible for. There's some things that we can't necessarily change, like the emissions that are related to running a government, or, you know, running our defence industry or various other things. And I'm not even sure that they're even calculated in the government's figure. But we can have some control over what we're buying and where we're buying it from. And the motto around, we talked at the beginning of this whole set about sustainability, and the long motto, the adage about sustainability is act local, think global. You know, do things close to your home as possible, but be connected to the world, be connected to the earth, be aware of what's going on our planet. So, and the more we buy stuff from that originate from a long way away, the bigger our carbon footprint is going to be. And that's why it's now many businesses are starting to look at this, but we as individuals need to think about it too. So for me, the fact that tools are there to calculate our footprint, that we don't know how that tool works, which is what Doreen was saying, is a problem, because we can't see then the actions that we can take to change what we're doing, because we can't see how much that relates. I think, you know, it might be a bit boring, and I know we're going on. There's quite a lot we're still going to share, but we're going to have to leave it. This book about How Bad Are Bananas talks about lots of different products and services and the different emissions related to them. And whilst it doesn't talk about everything, it gives you a good idea of what things will tend to generate smaller emissions and what things will generate larger emissions. And by reading this, you know, yes, sending an email generates a certain amount of emissions, but you compare that to actually going to visit someone 100 miles away, driving there and driving back again, or a Zoom meeting like this. We're quite close geographically, but we could all be driving into one place. How many emissions would that have generated to have this meeting, and how many, you know, holding it via Zoom has made it probably a lot lower. So I just want to finish up really, if I can, because obviously we've gone on a long time. Sorry about this. There are other things there is a tool here that will tell us what emissions we generate in Wellingborough. And I won't show you that now, but it basically, the borough of Wellingborough, which now no longer exists, but I don't know if the figures, anyway, it generates about 15 tons of CO2 equivalent emissions every year. It's slightly higher for our consumption, but that's what we're generating. And then I will show you. No, you can do it per household. I mean, I could show you the tool, but we haven't got time for me to show you the tool now. But it's well worth looking at. And there's a little, once you go onto this website here, there's a little film you can watch as you work it out, and it shows you how to use the system and how to compare, say, Wellingborough Borough Council area with Corby or Kettering, or they've worked it out. This tool compares parish and town councils, local authorities and government figures. So you can look at different things, and it shows you where most of the emissions are coming from, whether it's households, whether it's travel, whether it's industry, etc. So it's quite a good tool. I think, we could do another session another time and I could go through that in more detail, but obviously we've got to finish now. And the other thing is just below, and this one's really for you, Greg, the Centre for Sustainable Energy has also done a tool to help local authorities to plan. Well, I don't know if it's whether it's just their own emissions, but to plan. It is about their own emissions, but it's also about their sphere of influence, and to plan reductions around carbon emissions, both directly and indirectly. Again, it's still using that kind of approach, that scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 philosophy, really. So you might want to have a look at that tool. Anyway, so how does knowing about your emissions help? There were some of the good questions that have been asked. Well, it helps us to see where our highest emissions are, and help us to make changes. Some businesses are now required to map their emissions and to create a carbon reduction plan at how they're going to get to net zero, and to set a timescale for doing that. The government needs to do this because it's got global reduction targets that it's trying to achieve, and it has to map these. And if we do it, we can also help towards that. And there's opportunities that come from us knowing this stuff, it's the same as knowing how much energy we're using. We can make changes if we understand, and that's what we need to do. I'm not saying that after one session today you all understand, but I personally feel there's more work for us to do to make a system that is straightforward for us. And then there's benefits for all of us to learn how we can change the way we live and work as if we understand this a bit better. So what actions can we take to reduce emissions? Well, that's the question 1, but I'm going to move on. There's something for you to think about, things that we can do. Will cutting our carbon emissions and getting to net zero solve the problem? Is one of the questions I want to ask. Will that be it then, job done, if we get to net zero, or even if we get to net negative? Will we have moved to more sustainable ways of living?
No, you'll find another way of stuffing it up.
Yeah, because the thing is that this is looking at carbon emissions. This isn't necessarily going back. Remember those things at the start, which we defined as being sustainable life for us, cutting our carbon emissions doesn't necessarily make sure that everybody has got food on the table and a roof over their heads and is able to live sustainably. It doesn't necessarily stop industrial processes, cutting down trees and ignoring nature and digging up nature and digging up, areas of natural beauty. It doesn't necessarily stop that. I mean, obviously, hopefully the emissions have happened, it has, but we cannot just expect that it will do that just because we're reducing the emissions. So there's other things that we need to do. And again, I would ordinarily be asking you what these might be, but we've got to move on. So that's something to think about. And the other thing is, we thought about what a sustainable life we could look like and what we might want to travel to. We're talking about getting net zero by 2030, 2040, 2050. we might want to decide, actually, we want to transition to more sustainable ways of living, but how do we know we're doing it? How do we know we've got there? How do we know we've succeeded? And because the carbon footprint, you can see you're reducing your emissions. Once you understand how it's calculated, and we create a system that's clearer to understand, and you can see it going down, and you can see the emissions going down, whether it's globally or locally, whatever. But how do we know that we've transitioned to more sustainable ways of living? It's probably as much to do with how we feel about things and what we're observing than it is about measuring stuff. So we're looking at creating a little bit of a chart like this. So I looked at the Sustainable Development Goals for the globe, and I wrote some of them down here. And what we would be looking at is if we could come up with a chart of what it feels like to be living a sustainable life, and then asking ourselves the question, scoring from 1 to 10, how close do we feel we are to doing that? And then we can map that journey each year. So each year we can think, are we getting closer? Are we feeling closer to living that sustainable life? So that's something we want to look at as well. So, because we've been thinking that just mapping the footprint or just reducing the CO2 emissions isn't going to necessarily create the kind of life that we want to live. So we have to set objectives for each of these things and then see that we're moving towards them. So that's something we're going to be thinking about too. I won't go through each of those, but some ideas. And the other thing is, Jonathan sent me a very good link today from Friends of the Earth. They've set up a website called Taking Climate Action. This is for a lot of people, but I mean, I'm just going to click on this, see if it takes me there or if it just chucks me out. Oh, it does. And this is a load of data about climate action that either is happening or could happen in Northamptonshire. So I thought you might want to see this, Greg, if you haven't seen it before. And it shows all these different ways that Friends of the Earth, from their statistics and the different analysis they're doing, the ways that they think that we're doing in achieving the more sustainable objectives that we have. So that's worth having a quick look at when you get a chance. And that's got some headlines about transport and fixing homes, etc. Things that we can do. And it also talks about local authorities that have taken action and are starting to make these changes across those sustainable goals. So, and lastly, are there any questions? Are there any questions? I think it's been a bit of a marathon. I'm sorry that it's just not straightforward, this stuff isn't. Are there any questions for anybody?
I think you stunned them all into silence, Mary.
Yeah, I think you're all worn out now.
I was going to ask how you calculate a carbon footprint, but I think we've dealt with that.
No, look on the internet. There's lots of examples. No, you're joking aside. There are some links, obviously, we put on the website, and there's many more. I mean, there are so many tools I was looking at. I just haven't had time to read them all, really. But yeah,
we are doing a web page for you just to try and get all this in one place. So it's wcap.org.uk/sustainability. So hopefully we can get sort of obviously the recordings online, but also a lot of these links and a lot of sort of the advice that you've got, and it'll all be in there sort of as we go through these workshops one by one. That page will be growing and growing and growing.
There's no more hands going up, so thank you very much for bearing with us. We've gone over a bit, getting this a habit, this isn't it? And we'll see you next time. The next session is in 2 weeks' time, and it's about transitioning. So we're going to hear from a few people, hopefully from some transition town communities. It's going to talk about, we've talked about sustainability, but how we actually move towards making that happen. Okay, Thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion.
Yeah, thank you, Marion.
Bye.
See you later.
Bye, everybody.